Everyone, welcome to a new video. This is was the EU united and went imperialist, I guess. There is something in the background, so sorry for that noise. But other than that, let's start. So, to begin off with, this is the EU from the sources I've got. We got Greenland and French Guiana as well, which probably won't become useful, but just then. So firstly, we would probably... Oh, also no alliances. These obvious reasons being that it would probably cause the entire world to go to war with the EU as soon as they declared war on someone. So to start off with, we have them declaring war on the Balkans. Mainly to, fix this gap down here. As these two are probably harder to invade, as they are pretty mountainous. And Switzerland is basically a fortress. That's centre. Okay. So, I don't know which colour. I might use my green. So, no, it's too big. So, start off with, the invasion of North Serbia begins with the armies of, Hungary and Croatia attacking down there. The Romanian and Bulgarian armies kind of attacking southern Serbia, Greece attacking Albania, and a bit of Croatian forces going into I forgot his name, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Turn off the tolerance, not risking it. Anyway, as the armies continue to march, some western armies start to arise, such as the Italian army up here, which aids heavily, especially since Italy makes a naval landing in Montenegro and northern Albania. As the Greek army continues to move up, they fully take over North Macedonia, leading to most of the Albanian army moving and eventually surrendering. Kosovo kind of rebels away, as the rest of the countries just kind of fall. The peace treaty is just full annexation into the EU, and I'll quickly cut while I do that. Anyway, here we go. The Balkans is now fully under the EU. That's good. So next up on the chopping block, we probably have Austria and Switzerland, which may take a while, seeing we are mainly mountains. I believe the Alps go something like this through them. So, like that. With this area kind of being not as mountainous, but still somewhat mountainous. Anyway, we begin with the German armies moving into northern Austria again, followed closely by Croatia and countries around here. I'm just going to say EU armies from now on, unless I need to specify. Basically meeting up with the Alps, same as in Switzerland. They kind of take the lower Alp areas. To eventually they have to send the special divisions in to take over the Alps, which does lead to many deaths. And basically Switzerland becoming a wasteland as they blow off everything to delay the Europeans. Oh, I say Europeans, they are Europeans. To delay the invaders. But as is shown now, they get fully annexed into the EU as well. With some countries being happy about this, others being like, why are we attacking nations? Europe is pretty much, the main EU part of Europe is pretty much all together now. Good, that's good. So next up we have Eastern Europe. Yeah, they're just trying to unite Europe so far, with them declaring war on Ukraine and Belarus, including Moldova and the Ukraine state, the region of Transnistria. Also realised I didn't do that. Oh, there, there, there. There we go. Anyway, we start off with, of course, Russia joining. Where's the green? There we go. I can't find it. Oh no, that's good green, I think. Yeah, there we go. With Russia joining, having pretty sure it's like this currently. Maybe a little less for Russia. Maybe Ukraine like this a bit. I'm just gonna say it's like this. Anyway, with the EU intervening, Russia starts to fully mobilise, ready to take as much of Ukraine as possible. However, in the meantime, the EU army moves in through all the fronts. I should probably turn on major cities and capitals. Taking the capital of I forgot the name, Moldova, and taking the city of List, I think it is, something like that. They also moved around the Lithuanian capital, mainly just to protect it. I feel like the main capital would probably be in Brussels, where the EU headquarters is. Anyway, a spearhead is made taking the Belarusian capital as the armies continue. However, as they get to this point, Russia is fully mobilised to start flooding into, well, firstly their old ally and Ukraine. So we get to this point where Ukraine is very much getting invaded, with the capital of Kiev, don't know how it took me a while, being sieged by the Russians, and three major cities, or three major, now it's already fallen I think, two major cities falling in Ukraine, and one in Belarus. However, the EU army see this and start to speed up, as they start to rush into the normal lands of, well, the non-major lands, capital land, major cities, as there is none really left, until they get to around this point where they can spearhead to this one, taking more of the coast. However, yet again, at this point, the Russian armies managed to firstly take Kiev, and also take this remaining major city, leading to Ukraine surrendering to EU and Belarus surrendering to Russia. Anyway, the peace treaty will be shown in a second. See you after then. The peace treaty is shown below, with Moldova being fully annexed, with the capital of Belarus ending up in the hands of the EU. However, the capital of Ukraine does end up in Russian hands. However, Russia does lose an ally, but like I said, alliances don't really count yet, or don't exist yet. I don't know why I undid that, because I'll just start taking an alliance. So I'm going to make an alliance real quick. I'm going to cut so I can do it properly. I'll see you after then. A new alliance is formed between the Russians, Kazakhs, Turks, Armenians, and these two kind of puppet states to Russia up here, in a sort of defensive state towards the EU, as they all are kind of mostly or have European parts to them. Oh, actually, that's what John should join. Is there a Turkish ally? Anyway, the new alliance is formed kind of to combat EU expansion. However, three countries that are not in the alliance remain not in the EU. 4 if you count Georgia. The EU declares war on Norway. The invasion of Norway begins. However, I have just realised no, they are in the right colour, so we can't really do the other one. However, another country joins, and you can kind of see who I'm doing. The UK joins to combat EU expansion, followed by them forcing Iceland into the fray, as they're like, if we die, you're next. Which the Icelandic people kind of agree with, so yay. With this beginning, I don't know why I zoomed in so much, the armies of Sweden to the Pacific flood into Oslo and the Norwegian land, cutting off the north very quickly, taking it over within a matter of weeks. Well, up here, what I'm doing now is kind of due to finish out. Anyway, within a matter of weeks, before the UK even joins, in fact, this is what the front lines look like. When the UK joins, they start an instant invasion of Ireland to defend their claims in North Ireland, taking the capital of Dublin as it was a surprise attack, eventually making Ireland surrender. However, they cannot start a land invasion yet. They do, however, send troops to Norway, and I don't know why. They take over the island of, I forgot the name of this one, but they take over, kind of blocking the North Sea off, starting a trying to start a naval blockade, but terribly failing as their navy is pretty old, compared to the German navy, in fact. I picked the wrong colour. As more troops start to arrive in Norway, Norway starts to fall a lot quicker, until eventually the country surrenders over, leaving the UK to stand alone. A naval the canal down here, not canal, the tunnel down there is blown up, kind of cutting off the UK from the rest of them. And just do something real quick. The US takes Greenland, and no one really argues with it, as the EU don't really fancy a war with the US currently. This also leads to Iceland surrendering, leaving the war, as they don't really see being surrounded. That kind of leaves the UK fully alone. In Russia, the UK government is having talks with Putin to dissuade him to join the war, as the only chance they have at winning is if the Russians start an invasion. The Russians currently say no. Not a good day for England. I mean for the UK. No, it is not. Anyway, this stalemate lasts for a few more years, as Russia starts to strangely mobilise the border. Maybe they might help the UK after all. Till one day, an invasion, the capital of Belarus is taken, and Russian troops start to flood into EU lands. No declaration was signed. However, the Lithuanian capital is next to follow, as a full Russian invasion begins. As the EU wasn't expecting to be attacked by Russia so swiftly, as they expected them to be we're declaring war, they kind of pushed back quite a lot within a matter of a few days. However, I'm going to do a different colour for that. The troops in Finland do start to move around, as the Finnish were prepared for an attack from Russia. And Russia didn't really want to defend up here, as they had more problems. The Turkish armies start to invade into the Aegean Islands, I think it's called, and takes over Cyprus, literally taking over Crete as well, leading to the main invasion force starting to move into Europe. As troops start to flood across Europe to the new Russian front, it is too late, as Russia does meet up with Kaliningrad, leaving the Balkans cut off, and the Russian navy kind of blockading them as best as it could, leading to the Baltics surrendering. However, at this point, the EU is starting. Oh, I also realised these islands are kind of holding on to Norway. The EU starts to actually do construction, which leads them to manage to actually get across the channel and land in. I don't know what that is. I know that's Calais. I don't actually know what the other side of the thing is called. Anyway, they land taking this major cities down here. Would have done this Torseneth, probably. Starting a full-on invasion, taking London within a matter of weeks. As most forces start to, well, there is a lot more troops flooding into the UK. As they take out, if they can take out the UK, they can kind of focus on Russia. Rebellions in Ireland start to kick out majorly, leading to occupied areas starting to break away. Of course, the Irish are rebelling. Even in Northern Ireland, it happens. With, I'm not going to say, I think it's Dublin. No, I think that's the Irish. I don't know. With Ireland eventually being fully liberated, even North Ireland, and the invasion of the mainland from the Irish side begins as well, as Scotland starts to fall. At this point, the Russians have realised they probably should have joined earlier if they wanted to stand a chance. So they start to speed up their expansion, trying to reach the Moldovan capital, which they manage to barely do, but they do. As the Russian forces start to actually get kicked out of some areas, such as in Poland, the front starts to collapse, basically, with Russian forces starting to retreat to more secure areas, leading to Moldova's capital being liberated, and some areas reaching the, Russian border after the treaty. With this border being reached, the EU decides to start a offensive into Russia, liberating Kiev, liberating Kiev and a bit of Belarus at the same time. Down here in Turkey, it's pretty much the same thing, with the Turkish army being pushed back on the mainland. However, on the seafront, the Turkish are still taking islands from Greece, as most navies are still around the UK. It might look like the EU may win this war, and might finally unite the entire continental Europe. This does also then spark them to declare war on Iceland. Again, it turns out the British were right. Anyway, the British are falling, with Scotland fully being invaded, and the frontliners continuing as more and more troops arrive in the north, same as in the south, as Wales falls as well, leading to them focusing on the coast, circling in the Midlands, and eventually taking out all major British resistance for now. The Norwegian islands up here are taken eventually. The same with Ireland and Iceland. And the Danish islands being returned. That's the wrong colour. Same again, wrong colour. There it is. No, it's black. I can't be bothered to change it. Anyway. Russia now sees the full force of the EU hitting it. It's the wrong side. With them reaching Kaliningrad and starting to weaken the Russian supplies, or supply lines, liberating lots more of Lithuania, and eventually starting an invasion into the fortress of Kaliningrad, fully taking it, using that as a base to push further, reaching the Russian border, liberating Latvia, and starting a naval invasion in Estonia, like so, eventually leading to the Baltics being liberated. Yeah, I'm just going to use that colour, I can't be bothered to use 5 different colours. There we go. With the Finnish armies continuing to attack the Russians, leading to this peninsula falling, and the south starting to fall, especially as the Finnish reach Damaged City. There. The last of the Russian resistance within the EU starts to get kicked out, as they are pushed to Damaged City, where the last Russian fight happens with them losing and getting kicked out, with the EU managing to show their unity with the destruction of Russia, especially as Ukrainians and the other oppressed people also start to rebel in the EU areas, ending up helping the EU to invade further, with them liberating Crimea, taking that major city, pretty much cutting the Russians off from their good thoughts, and kicking Turkey out of their expanded land, and starting an invasion into Turkey, pushing up to Istanbul, liberating some Turkey. Also, with the navies arriving having finished off Britain, they managed to liberate all of the islands, including Cyprus, where even northern Cyprus is liberated off the Turkish. They are not doing well. This is shown with the EU starting to make landings across the Crimea, taking out this puppet regime, pretty much trapping the Russian navy in this little bay here, which eventually is taken, with the Russian navy being fully destroyed. Well, in this area anyway, there's still some in Japan, or Asian area. Anyway, the Battle of the Bosporus, I think it's called, begins, with the EU instantly winning. This probably would have lasted a few weeks, especially with Russian ships being in the area probably. But as the Bosphorus falls, Turkey does not last any longer, with their Aegean coast falling alongside it. So I forgot to cut that out, I'm sorry, and not over something. Anyway, with Turkey continuing to be invaded, they do not last much longer, with the coast starting to be plundered on both sides, and the city of Batman, I think it's here, falling. Not good, Batman is gone. With the EU army kind of starting to try to encircle Ankara, I think it's called, eventually reaching the encirclement and starting to destroy the Turkish army. For this, I probably should have said this at the start of the video, the EU is definitely most likely buffed, as I doubt they'll be able to do this much to Russia and the UK simultaneously. Like, they possibly could, but like with Russia at full mobilisation, I doubt they would be able to. And I doubt, well, to be honest, it's not realistic anyway. Belarus wouldn't be invaded without Russian intervention. Anyway, the EU starts to spearhead towards Armenia, trying to encircle the remaining parts of Turkish troops, with them reaching their capital, eventually reaching down to the border of Iran, cutting the Turkish off and fully taking over Armenia. With the EU army started to push the Turks into the border regions. The Turkish army starts to flee, surrendering in Iran, or in like this area of Iran, Syria, and even Iran. I was going to say Iraq. I'm getting them mixed up. Anyway, the last Turkish stronghold within this major city here starts to fail as the EU army starts to siege it, eventually taking it, leading to the Turkish surrendering. Azerbaijan is not going to survive much longer, with their invasion being taken within a matter of weeks. And the colour, the EU colour, because I can't decide to get a new colour, that Georgia is declared on, with the EU armies quickly flooding into the nation, taking it over quite quickly compared to, well, Turkey, but not as quickly as it was shown there, obviously. With this last Georgian puppet state of Russia being taken, and the Caucasus under threat of being fully invaded, Russia does not look very stable. Especially with a stairhead to Moscow being very clearly formed, leading to the siege of Moscow with the EU troops just on the outskirts, slowly strengthening their position every now and again. The Russian armies over here does not look very well, especially with China joining. Would have to click the right button. With China joining, leading to mass Chinese invasion in the south, as China does not fancy the EU taking all of Russia, and also they would like now outer Manchuria back. But then they're heading towards pretty much all major cities. And same with Kazakhstan, but then they're heading towards the nearby major city. They pretty much secure their border and ensure that, oh actually not up here, but they ensure that the EU cannot push the Russian, or the United Russian State, or whatever they make, to their borders. Anyway, back to the EU. With China invading Russia, it does not go well for the Russians. With a lot of the Russian army having to be retreated, the Caucasus eventually fall, leading to the invasion of Kazakhstan to also commence. Moscow is no troops are removed from Moscow, as that is kind of a major point, with the last Ukrainian major city falling back over, and pretty much Russia starting to collapse. This is clearly shown with troops deserting to the EU in Moscow, leading to its collapse. As the EU starts to go faster, China quickly starts to send occupation troops, not really attacking, but as most of the Russian troops here just kind of want a free Russian state, not to be part of the EU. As most people that don't want to be part of the EU kind of use the railway to head over to the Asian part and rebel to China. Same as on the border of Kazakhstan, that is also mostly Russian troops. But China just starts to walk in, extending along the railway, using it to kind of help the Russian rebels, to kind of defect. As the Chinese start to invade more, the entire eastern part of Russia kind of just surrenders or collapses over to China, with most of the people there kind of just being there because they don't want to be part of the EU. Russia is definitely not looking good. A few more advances later, Russia eventually collapses. Collapse colour, yeah. into a sort of full-on rebellion. Not rebellion, anarchy state. With Azerbaijan quick to follow, as most Russians that don't want to depart the anarchy state can flood to Kazakhstan, leading to Kazakhstan becoming unstable and also collapsing. Anyway, the EU and China meet up in... Where should they meet up? They meet up in Cairo to discuss a peace treaty. And I will quickly do that and show you what occurs of the peace treaty. The peace treaty. We have the EU annexing quite a lot of land, including some land outside of Europe, probably to secure the European lands, such as the entire of the Turkish peninsula. Also, probably because I don't know where the I'm pretty sure it's like there, but it's very close anyway. And same in Russia, they annex a little bit past the mountain range, I think like there, which like divides Europe. But they annex a little bit past it just to secure their claims, and they also do make a little like sort of democratic regime. Probably working with the old Kazakh government that like are pro-democracy. I think it's their democracy, I don't know. But working with probably the old Kazakh government to make a sort of state over here. Over in the Chinese side, we have China annexing some border territories over here, annexing outer Manchuria and some more further lands into Siberia, probably leading to Mongolia being the next to fall, because that would look nice. And I'm pretty sure China might have a claim on them. With a Chinese, sort of Soviet Chinese state being formed here, with most of Siberia being part of China, or no, part of this puppet state, and the Kazakhstan being part of it as well. Probably with China, Putin might flee to here if he made it out of Moscow. But China, if he did, China would have, like execute him and put a puppet emperor leader, I don't know. But anyway, a puppet leader over here. Anyway, that leaves it for today with the entire of Europe being united, and possibly a three-way Cold War between the US, China, EU and China starting to occur. If you want me to dive into the Cold War, comment below. I could always make a new video on this, another video on this kind of world, if you want me to. But anyway, that is it today. Comment any other ideas, like if you liked this video, and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Thank you, and goodbye.